Picture this. You're 15 years old. You're not old enough to drive a car, not old enough to vote, and not even old enough to get a full-time job. You're just a kid in the eyes of society. This isn't a movie script. This isn't some hacker thriller you stream on Netflix. This is the real story of Jonathan James, a teenager who broke into NASA and the Pentagon. A boy whose online alias C0M Raid would strike fear into the halls of government agencies. But his story isn't just about daring hacks and digital triumphs, it's about consequences. About a justice system that didn't know how to handle a genius kid who crossed the line. And ultimately about a tragedy that reminds us how fragile life can be when brilliance and recklessness collide. Tonight, we're going to unpack everything. The rise of a young hacker, the hacks themselves, the fallout, and the heartbreaking conclusion. So sit back, because this is a story that spans from bedrooms with dial-up internet all the way to the stars above our heads. The late 1990s were a different world. The internet was no longer just a tool for scientists and academics. It was exploding into everyday life. You could hear the sound of modems screeching as millions of Americans logged onto AOL chat rooms. Websites looked basic by today's standards, but to a teenager in 1999, the internet was a universe waiting to be explored. And with that explosion came curiosity. Kids who grew up with computers weren't satisfied with just browsing websites. They wanted to push boundaries, to see what was hidden, to break through walls and understand the systems behind the screen. That's where hackers came in. Back then, hacking wasn't yet painted as purely criminal. Sure, there were those who stole credit card numbers or spread viruses, but many were explorers, digital adventurers who thrived on the thrill of going somewhere they weren't supposed to. The media glamorized them too. Movies like War Games in the 80s and Hackers in the 90s gave hacking a rebellious, almost heroic image. But in reality, the US government was deeply worried. The Cold War had ended, but a new battlefield had emerged: cyberspace. A world where teenagers with home computers could become potential threats to national security. In that climate of curiosity, paranoia, and rapid technological growth, one teenager would stand out: Jonathan James, a boy from Florida who would soon prove that even the most secure systems on Earth weren't safe. Jonathan Joseph James was born in 1983. He grew up in South Florida, just an ordinary kid in many ways. But Jonathan wasn't ordinary when it came to computers. From a young age, he showed an incredible aptitude for technology. He spent countless hours in front of his screen, teaching himself how systems worked. For Jonathan, computers weren't just machines, they were puzzles, and he loved solving puzzles. Online, he adopted the handle C0M Raid. Handles were essential in hacker culture, part identity, part shield. Behind C0M Raid, Jonathan could be anyone. He could be feared, respected, anonymous. Unlike criminal hackers who were motivated by money, Jonathan's drive was curiosity. He wasn't chasing dollar signs. He wasn't even chasing fame. He wanted the rush, the thrill of bypassing security systems that adults claimed were unbreakable. He started small, testing school networks, sneaking into low-level systems just to see if he could. But each success emboldened him. Each victory whispered, "You can go further." And soon, he looked at the ultimate target, the agency that represented humanity's greatest scientific frontier, NASA. It was 1999. Jonathan James was 15 years old. He sat in his bedroom in Florida, and the glow of his computer lighting up the room, and began probing NASA's systems. For most of us, NASA feels untouchable, an institution with the smartest scientists, the best engineers, and of course, some of the most secure systems in the world. But Jonathan found a way in. Through a vulnerability, he gained access to NASA computers. What he discovered was astonishing: source code for the International Space Station's life support system. Think about that. The ISS orbits over 200 miles above Earth. Astronauts live and work there, relying on systems that control the station's temperature, humidity, and oxygen levels. And Jonathan James, a teenager at home in Florida, had the code in his hands. NASA had no choice. They shut down their entire system for 3 weeks to investigate and recover. The cost? Over $40,000 in damages. Now pause and imagine. A kid with a computer holding the keys to astronaut survival. That's not just a hack. That's a digital earthquake. For Jonathan, it was the thrill of a lifetime. But for NASA, it was a nightmare. And for the US government, this was just the beginning. Because Jonathan wasn't finished. If he could reach the stars, why not the Pentagon? Jonathan also targeted the US Department of Defense. Specifically, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, or DTRA. This wasn't some random office. This was the branch responsible for monitoring and reducing the threat of nuclear weapons. At 15 years old, Jonathan managed to infiltrate their systems. He intercepted over 3,000 emails. He gathered usernames and passwords. He even installed a backdoor, a secret pathway that allowed him to slip in and out of the system whenever he wanted. The gravity of this can't be overstated. A teenager was peering into military communications, exploring networks that discussed national security. Inside government offices, alarms were ringing. Who was this intruder? Was it a foreign government? Was it a terrorist group? No one imagined it could be a kid sitting in his room in South Florida. But that's exactly what it was. Jonathan James had pulled off something that humiliated some of the most powerful agencies in the world. And the US government was determined to catch him. In 2000, investigators traced the hacks back to Jonathan. His suburban home was raided by the FBI. His computers were confiscated. His secret identity, CRM raid, was unmasked. Jonathan became the first juvenile in the United States to be incarcerated for cybercrime. The punishment? 6 months of house arrest, probation until the age of 18. And perhaps the harshest of all, he was banned from using computers for anything other than schoolwork. For most teenagers, losing access to video games would be punishment enough. But for Jonathan, computers were his entire world, his escape, his passion, his identity. To take them away was like cutting off oxygen. Jonathan served his sentence, but the damage was done. He was no longer just Jonathan James, the kid from Florida. He was the NASA hacker, a label that would follow him for the rest of his short life. Jobs? Hard to come by. Trust? Almost impossible. He was talented, but employers saw a risk, not a genius. In 2007, another blow came. The FBI launched an investigation into a massive retail hack involving stolen credit card data from the company TJX. During their sweep, they raided Jonathan's home again, suspecting him of involvement. Jonathan denied any connection, and indeed, no evidence linked him to the crime. But once again, he felt targeted. Once again, he felt the system had already judged him guilty. The weight of his reputation, the pressure of suspicion, and the loss of his freedom crushed him. In May 2008, Jonathan James was found dead. He had taken his own life. He was only 24 years old. His suicide note was chilling. It read, "I honestly had nothing to do with TJX. I have no faith in the justice system. Perhaps my actions today and this letter will send a stronger message to the public. Either way, I have lost control over this situation, and this is my only option." It was a devastating end to a brilliant but troubled young man. Jonathan James, the boy who hacked NASA, was gone, but his story was far from forgotten. Jonathan James's story raises difficult questions. Should young hackers be punished harshly, or should their talents be nurtured? Was Jonathan a criminal, or was he a misunderstood prodigy caught between curiosity and a system unprepared for kids like him? His actions forced agencies like NASA and the Pentagon to confront their vulnerabilities. His case shaped how the justice system approached juvenile cybercrime. And his story serves as a reminder: genius can be fragile, and curiosity, when unchecked, can be dangerous. Today, Jonathan James is remembered as both a legend and a cautionary tale. The teenager who reached the stars and fell back to Earth. Jonathan James's life is one of the most extraordinary stories in the history of hacking. At 15, he accomplished the unthinkable. But the weight of his choices, combined with a system that didn't know how to handle him, ultimately crushed him. So what do you think? Was Jonathan James a reckless criminal who got what he deserved? Or was he a brilliant, misunderstood mind who could have changed the world if given the right support? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's start a discussion. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most shocking hacker stories of all time, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell, because we've got more unbelievable true stories on the way. Sometimes reality is stranger and more tragic than fiction.